something two, it was two
All
something.
247 South Road, but there's a password for it.
Yeah, it's, the password is,
Get started. All right, it's 6:03. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Richard Hackle is absent with prior notification. He was away on a trip. First item is public comments for items not on the agenda for discussion, not action. Any? About 6 feet away from the owl. We still haven't done the tape, sir. We need to bring painter shade. That's perfect.
Okay, so my concern is, and I know you're not gonna take action, but my end result is I'd like to have, I'm hoping there could be a workshop or something like that to discuss this problem. And it has to do with the possibility with all of the erosion, and this is getting to be the time of year where we get those terrible storms. We have buildings that are on the edge of the banks, ready to go into the water. In numerous places around the island, they're pretty close. Some are already basically in the water. And so I guess my concern is, what is the town's position if these buildings go out to sea? And all of a sudden they end up in front of my house, you know, or David's house, or Will's house, or anybody who happens to have shore frontage. And whose responsibility is it? And I went back thinking about the whole idea of an attractive nuisance and buildings that are unfit for habitation. And we have provisions that the town can regulate this. And back 12 plus or minus years ago, the then code enforcement officer actually gave something in writing to an owner who had a barn and gave them 3 weeks to take the barn down. And the barn eventually fell down itself, and now the house is eventually going to fall down too, because the town never followed through. And so I guess that's my real question. And down at the end of my road, we provide public access for people, and I don't want to have all of a sudden go down there and find all this, like, I mean, as it is, you know, things come in and out of the shore, and, you know, you deal with them. But if you've got a house out floating around, it's like on Huckleberry Finn, you know?
Multiple houses.
Yeah, and so I guess it's something I think the town should think about before it actually happens. So anyway, that's my concern.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Other public comments for items not on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Moving on, town reports.
Hello, everybody. All right, so there are several items on the town administrator's report. And I'll kind of go through them briefly, and then if the board has any questions, please let me know as I'm going through them. So the first item, which has been on for the last several meetings, there are a number of committees that we are in need of volunteers on. Finance committee still continues to be a committee that is needing to have at least one more volunteer in order for them to begin the work. With the budget discussion actually happening tonight with the fiscal year 26 budget schedule, it would be helpful to have that committee be able to begin the process and to be able to play a role in assisting the board this year in the budget process. Board of Adjustment and Appeals, transfer station, the planning board now has a void as well. So there are several committees that need volunteers. If there's anybody that's interested, we have an application on the website, or they can come in and see us at the town office. Joint standing committee.
Is there any reason why the finance committee, only 2 members can't meet?
So with the finance committee, just like with many other, the board adopted, and there is a minimum number for quorum. And so the finance committee needs 3 members for it to be a quorum.
I don't know, are you sure about that? Did you write it up?
There's no ordinance governing this committee. We decided not to do it. This is an informal committee that this board appointed with no
I
guidance.
recall it still saying that it needs a minimum of 3.
Well, you might be right.
So
We should amend that.
you should amend that if you want to get going. Because
I'll-
this first year, we were trying to get more informal this first year, because there's a lot of things.
Yeah, I'll look into that,
I would encourage the board to consider even with two people to get going.
Right.
I think that would be good. And I also spoke with Ann Baxter, who doesn't want to serve herself, but said she was recruiting someone. Have you talked to her? It sounded like she had a
nope, I have not had anybody else come
So
in.
I think she has the potential, yeah. Anyway, but
All right, I'll look at that. Joint standing committee with Yarmouth, so this discussion was really as a result of several meetings that took place. Discussing and talking about the proposed work that could be done and that Yarmouth was recommending at the Cousins Island. The Cousins Island work. And so this board decided that moving forward with, to have a discussion with the joint standing committee would be very efficient. So that meeting has been set up. It's November 19th in Yarmouth, with the town of Shebig board, as well as the Yarmouth board and town manager. And one of the discussions will be the floats, and then additional discussions will be brought up relative to the Blanchard lot and all of the other issues that are dealt on the other side.
Just a slight correction, it's not the entire board on either side, it's a few members.
Yeah, the joint standing committee representatives, yeah, not the entire boards. So,
And just refresh my memory, the boards of the wharf that need to be secured, that work is done by the town of Yarmouth staff,
there is
public works?
temporary repair work that is being done to make sure that the facility and the wharf is going to be stable to get through this winter. And that is something that the Yarmouth Public Works is coordinating to get done. The discussions that the joint standing committees will discuss are more of the long-term discussions that are needed, that this board did not, have a recommendation one way or another, but wanted to bring the discussions with them.
Thank you.
Jenks Road parking, and Jenks Road survey, so the committee that is in charge of meeting and discussing relative to that met with the Castine family recently. And we discussed the survey of the road that was done. The goal at this point is work towards a plan to be able to provide parking spaces on that road for those that are accessing the beach. Discussion took place about what kind of accommodation could be provided for the fishermen that use that area, and making sure that the residents are involved and aware of the process. And there was a consensus that it would be helpful to be able to have hopefully something lined up for next year with the busy season, with the work that is anticipated. The hope is that there's not going to be contracted services that's going to be needed. It would be something that the public works crew would be able to do. I don't know if Carol, if you want to weigh in anything. You were
the only
part of it.
other thing is the property owner is concerned about the access through the dunes and would like to have that restored. And so separately, the climate action team will kind of look into that. It may just be a weekend project. And there is DEP money available for restoration, so we'll look into that. But I think I would say the property owners have been very cooperative and are trying to, provide access for the public, but at the same time.
The next thing is the town emergency radio upgrade. So there's been several different projects that have been ongoing relative to this. The most recent one is the joint project between Yarmouth, Cumberland, and Shebig to do a radio upgrade. The shed has been delivered and installed. The electrical work is in the process of being completed. They will and should be finishing up on Monday, and then at that point, it really is in the hands of the fire chief to coordinate the actual installation of the radio upgrade system that is in conjunction with Yarmouth and Cumberland, but also the upgrade that was voted on between Shebig and Long Island a couple of years ago that has been on hold as a result of it. So hopefully things can go smoothly, and the fire department will have that project complete in the near future.
Radios went out again today.
They did.
Yep. Yep. Oh, good.
Next one is the Public Works update. So, as of this week, we are back to nearly full capacity with Public Works employees, which is really exciting. We have 3 permanent employees that are, participating and are playing a role in the Public Works. And then we have 1 that is a, part-time fill-in. So we have 1 40-hour, 1 20-hour. Jeff Westcott has agreed to help me oversee the Public Works operations and handling a lot of the clerical work, a lot of the communication, a lot of the, direction that needs to be provided to the Public Works Department. A meeting is being scheduled with the fire chief and Public Works and myself to come up with a plan for emergency related procedures when there's power outages, when there's storms, when there's roads being blocked and so forth. So then that way everyone's on board of what the process is and everybody knows of what needs to be done. And there is no one individual party on the road by themselves, putting themselves in danger by trying to clear everything themselves. At the same time, there is a discussion that's taken place to figure out, with it being a completely new department, trying to figure out what the process is gonna be relative to plowing. That is something that I met with Bill Calthorpe, who has been a long time, part-time with that. He's gonna get together with Jeff and the other Public Works employees and come up with a plan between all of them, how the roads are gonna get plowed, which roads are get plowed by who and so forth. Other than having the roads be plowed, this is also important in the sense that, we've recently found out that that gray F-250 that we had that has been slowly rusting, Tanner went through it thoroughly and it is making its way to the graveyard in, the near future. It's not safe. It's rusted out. It's not something that, should be used or could be used in general, but plowing a lawn. That was one of the 3 primary vehicles that was being used for plowing. And so the fact that we have Bill Calthorpe that has the special license to drive the backup truck that we have that needs the license is that much more important for us to then be able to re-stagger which vehicles are going to be used for plowing. The town will need a pickup truck. The goal is that we are not going to go to the taxpayers at this point with a special town meeting and ask for funds to allocate for that. We are gonna do what we can to get through with the equipment and the staff that we have. If it comes to a point where we need to contract out one of the many plow drivers we have on Shebig, we will utilize that. But we are gonna do everything we can to get through this winter season and feel pretty confidently that it's going to be possible, especially if we don't have much snow. And then come the budget season, I will most likely recommend to the board that funds be allocated to replace a town pickup truck that could be used for a variety of reasons. So.
I want to add, I dropped in at Tanner's invitation to the town garage and you can see great progress with organizing and tidying up. So well done.
Carol?
And just so I understand, what do we have for plow vehicles, not, excluding the gray 250, what do we have left?
So we have 2 other plow trucks that are used regularly, a smaller red truck and then the bigger plow truck that was purchased new a couple of years ago. The smaller red truck is currently off island being maintenance because that broke down. So at the same time frame, we were looking at 2 out of the 3 primary plow vehicles out of commission. Tanner and Jeff coordinated that vehicle to be removed off the island and it's getting serviced. So the plan is for it to be back. And then the vehicle a few years ago that was the town was told that it was not passable due to a cracked, frame. And as a result, the town went out and bonded and bought a new pickup truck. Well, that cracked frame was fixed last year and a sticker was put in and it was, passable by Affordable Well Driller. And so that vehicle is now a backup vehicle that it's in full commission. And so that vehicle is the vehicle that requires a special license that the new Public Works employees do not have, but Bill Calford does. And so, the Public Works is going to reallocate which vehicles are used for which roads and then bring that vehicle into service. And go through the process. The one challenge is the F-250, because it's such a smaller vehicle, did a lot of the small side roads. And that is kind of the primary concern on how those roads are going to be plowed. Which in that case, most likely we're going to have Bill do those because he's going to be the most experienced and the one with the longest knowledge and history of the town roads to be able to plow those areas.
So that's 3 trucks that we have.
We will have 3 trucks, yes, yeah.
David?
Are the employees, the new employees, getting, their state bills, their
The license.
commission?
So at this point, the goal is try to get them really familiar with the town equipment and to be able to be a strong enough team that they can, do the things that need to be done on the island and have the knowledge to be able to perform as a team. But the goal is that, yes, we will move in the direction of them, getting those licenses, those 2 employees, but that's not the first priority that we're jumping into, since the 2 other vehicles could be driven without the license.
Thank you.
Sure.
And somebody mentioned, I think it was Jeff, the DOT has some kind of snowplow training, snowplow person training.
There are several trainings that, I started looking into, and I'll sit down and talk to Jeff more about, and then we'll try to get the crew and see what we can do. There's snowplow training, there's road making. There's a lot of training out there. It's just a matter of the employees doing it, which is the challenge we've experienced before.
Nice job.
So I think we're in going from having 1 employee that lived off island as a public works department to having all of them on island. I think we're looking at a pretty good position. So.
Thank you.
So the last thing that is not on the TA report, but it's something that has come up, the solar array buyout. So this is the year that we're creeping into within this fiscal year to finalize and do the buyout for the solar arrays. I did send an email to the climate action team to see if I could get a recommendation from their end, because last year when it was brought to the town's attention, it was put into their into their court for a recommendation, and I, with them doing everything that they're involved with, I sent them an email in hopes that they could provide some form of a recommendation. I'm not sure that it's needed because it is with the time frame, but I thought that it might be helpful to have their input on this aspect. Sure.
So last year they did write a memo to the select board with their thoughts on the solar array. So I think it should go in the select board packet. I don't think it ever got in the packet because we didn't have enough money set aside to buy it last year, so it was kind of a moot point. But and basically their recommendation is that it's really a financial decision and how much infrastructure, whether the town wants to own the infrastructure or not. And it's an option to buy it, it's not a requirement. So they recommended having the finance committee look at the financials that Steve provided, well, last year, but it would be this year. And so, but I'll send the memo, I think, and maybe we don't have to go through it in a select board meeting, but the overall recommendation was that the finance committee look at the finances of the, cost benefit ratio, basically. Because it's not a in their mind, it's not a climate technical decision, it's really a financial decision. Because if we own it, then we have to maintain it,
I thought there was a point in time at which we had to buy it, is that not the case? Okay.
right? On the solar thing, we don't have to buy it, it's not.
No, we don't have to buy it. We don't ever have to buy it.
Done.
Yeah, I just had a question. So I know we're putting money aside for 7 years or whatever it was.
Right, right.
So have we paid anything to them during these 7 years? Or is it just that we've been putting the money aside where something was gonna happen in 7 years?
We've been buying our electricity from them at a rate that I think covers part of the purchase. And we've been setting money aside. If I remember correctly, in the finance budget conversation last spring, what we had set aside was not quite enough to buy it out at that time. And rather than try to find money from contingency, we looked at the numbers and just quickly said, let's wait a year and then decide.
Right, but my question is, if we haven't been paying them anything, what, you ever heard what the deal is if we don't buy it out?
We are paying.
Oh, we are paying
Yeah,
something.
so we are paying them, and the original contract did have the, kind of the plan that, we are paying a revision, so we pay them on a quarterly, they send us a bill and we pay them, and then we break up the bill and allocate to each different department and what the costs are. These streetlights are not covered, so that's the town's biggest expense, and that's not covered. But with this particular agreement, the town was saving money over the course of 7 years, and so at the 7th year, they would be able to buy it. And so last year, when it was brought to the town's attention, the town was still on the 7-year plan, and at year 6, there wasn't enough money, which is why a decision was made, so.
Right, but it just seems like there's something missing in this that, and I don't remember because I can't remember all the details of this, but it seems as if, I know we're paying the electricity.
I don't have the memo in front of me, but the climate action team had multiple meetings with Steve and sort of outlined the benefits and the downside of purchasing it. It's definitely not a requirement. And I think it comes, so there's potentially more cost savings if we purchase it and we get sort of credit for the RECs, which means we can say we're reducing carbon, the carbon footprint so much, versus they can continue to own it, operate it, we pay the maintenance, but we don't have to, we don't have to physically own it. And so it's an option to purchase it, not a requirement.
So it's a 20-year life, if I remember correctly.
25, 20.
Yeah, and so I think I think it's a financial decision, and I think Steve's provided some good backup to kind of evaluate it. And also whether we have the capacity to kind of, manage it.
The capacity to manage, and then the other part is in the context of a lot of the other things that the town has on their plate right now, there is 75,000 in the reserve account for that particular allocation. The cost of the electricity is really, I wouldn't say it's minimal, but compared to other municipal expenses is not terrible. It's the streetlights that really are the most expensive thing, which solar has nothing to do with that whatsoever. So it would be wise for the town to look at the considerations, whether that buyout is cost effective or whether it would be more appropriate to go to the taxpayers and say that, do you want to continue doing this the way it is and then allocate the $75,000 towards one of these other significant projects that, that need a lot of money. So it's just a thought.
And on that question, Mika, on the streetlights, I noticed that some towns own their streetlights and some don't, and what's our status?
We don't own them.
We don't own them, so
CMP.
CMP owns them, but some towns have purchased them, right? And I don't know.
I don't know enough about that to really.
And then the other question I have is, are they all LED lights?
So they are all LED lights. Most recently, there were a couple of them, I believe the stone pier that hadn't been switched out, that they did switch out. And when that got switched out, that did make, a good difference to the bill. But we are still, there are some months where we're paying, $800 for
It's like
streetlights.
8,000.
This time of year, it really jumps up. During the summertime, it drops down a little bit, but it's a heavy expense. And I think some people thought with the solar that the streetlights would be included, but they're not.
Okay.
Good.
So that will be a future agenda item. So that's everything for the town administrator report. The other thing in the packet is a transfer station report. Jeff is here if you have any questions related to that. The one thing that I will mention is, Lionel Plant reached out to me recently because, they had heard about the difficulties that we're having with the brush dump, and, they were asked in terms of, the barging thing, which, that was never coordinated. And so they wanted to, one, see the facility to see what capacity there was, but then also see it to what extent they might be of an assistance or how we might use their services, in this particular situation. According to them, we are the only town in Casco Bay that collects our brush and, our wood. The rest of them do get it barged off, and so they're utilizing, the other municipalities utilize and use Lionel Plant to barge all of their brush and their, wood off. And so they came out, last week. I asked Bob to be, part of that discussion, more or less to be my chauffeur because I couldn't drive at that point. And, so we met, him at the dump, and, I got an email from him this evening that I will share with the board in terms of he's presenting. So before, there was the idea that we were gonna have several, a couple of large, tractor trailers be barged to the island, loaded up and then haul off, and that was gonna be about a $5,000 expense. There's two options with the town, helping load them, it's a little bit less, or if they load it, it could be anywhere between $250 a truckload to $300 a truckload, and that includes barging and hauling and everything. What they did is because the town had some, road materials being delivered, they coordinated with Jeff and asked if they could do a trial run with what was it, 2 loads, 3 loads? To see and have a better estimate of, based on how much they can get off in one truck, what that cost could be. And what they do is they bring this, the product, they bring it to a different facility where it gets ground up and it gets, taken care of and turned into mulch and whatnot. And so I have those numbers, I will forward it to you. That is an option moving forward that could be, thought of price wise. I don't know that it's gonna be much different from what we're paying now. And this could be a way to keep up with that continuously throughout the year, because we would, invest in a couple of, we would invest in a couple of cans and then have them there, and people would either dump directly into them or they would dump next to it and then Public Works can load them in. So going into the budget season, that is an alternative option that could be considered. Or for now, if instead of having the large trailer trucks come out here, if we utilize them instead on, to get some of the product off, that's also an option.
Carry on the line.
Yeah, so are you talking about unshipped brush? Is that what you mean?
So, what they're offering to do right now is to load off some of the chipped brush, and it would be, either $250 or $300 a truckload. And I think it's 20 cubic yards or something like that, and that includes the barging and everything to get some of that product off. But if we wanted to look at, a future alternative to how to handle the brush dump, they have size restrictions where it could be brush, it could be wood. And that's something that on an ongoing basis, could be done. And so that's something that the board would need to kind of thoroughly look at and discuss to see if that's, you know, maybe even for a year to try it out to see how it might work, rather than having a big pile up and then have this overwhelming amount of stuff, enclosures and things like that.
So it would probably turn out to be, there's still some talk that has to happen with the composting operation, but probably one can could take stumps and big diameter logs, and one can could take brush and smaller diameter logs, but we would no longer be chipping. We'd be shipping it off to be chipped. And the logic of the brush and the smaller diameter logs, we're organized about it. You put the brush in first, then you put the smaller diameter logs on top and use those to smash down the brush so that you get more weight per cube in effect. But there's a lot of work to be done there. We also need to come up with an estimate of how many cubic yards we had when Jamie started this year. Not too hard to do, just need to get a tape measure and go 3 dimensions and figure out a rough estimate. That would tell us how many roll-offs we would need to consider for a year from a budgetary standpoint, so.
And, what they did say was that the facility where it's going to, it does produce really nice mulch. And so we know that there are, you know, businesses and individuals that utilize having that more mulch available, at the transfer station. And so maybe there could be some form of an opportunity where with us getting this off the island, we are able to, you know, to compensate for that going off, be able to bring, even better product, and have the ability for the residents to be able to have access to that. But these are all, there was one meeting with them, I got one email, and it's just, you know, a discussion that is another alternative from the way things have been done.
Bringing the mulch back out would be virtually free because they would have been bringing an empty can anyway, if we decided to do that, but we'd have to figure out how to monetize it and all that kind of thing, so. Liza?
Yeah, that was my question. So there's a can, you call it, that comes over, that is filled and then goes back full,
Mhm.
and at this time comes back empty. What about all these trucks that are bringing gravel all the time?
So their objection to that concept is that it's harder to haul heavy product in a container, a can, than it is to haul it in a dump truck. It's harder to empty a can out. They don't like doing that. They've had a few contractors try to get them to bring lumber out in the cans, and it hasn't worked out real well for everybody involved. So
Yeah.
that's a discussion, but it's not something they're jumping to do.
The trucks is what, right now, if we wanted to, so right now, if we wanted to lug off as much of the shipped material as we want, it would be in those trucks that are bringing materials to the island. And it would be $250 to $300 a truck cost for the town to lug some of that off. And that includes the lugging and the barging. So they're,
Okay.
I mean, I think that's their way of probably trying to help us, so then we can work with them in the future. But, you know, that's,
The other obvious challenge is it would increase our barge traffic.
Yes.
That's something we need to be careful about
Yeah.
until we figure out our barging
Yeah.
situation. So, that it?
yes, unless you have any other questions relative to the transfer station project.
Seeing none, let's move along. So the item 24-100, any questions or comments beyond what we've already talked about from the public on the town administrator report? Okay. So I got a call after we put this item 24-100 on the agenda, from the director at the rec center saying she was gonna be out of town tonight. Most of you know, the kids are up in the mountains and she was one of the parents that was drafted to go to the mountains. And then, Bill was gonna come, the program director, but he wound up with a family conflict that he was not able to make it. They asked if we would, consider delaying this discussion until the next meeting in case the board had any questions about the MOU. So we could go ahead and talk about it, and if there were no big questions, we could check it off our list, or we could delay it to a subsequent meeting. What would the board like to do? Any thoughts, Dave?
Just a quick question, what are the substantive changes from last year's MOU to this one? Is it pretty much the same? Or is it?
No, it's very different.
It's dramatically different. It's a lot less
Yeah.
of an ask.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I went back to try to figure out what had been done in the past. This MOU is fairly similar to the one that was passed in like 2019. I guess the thing that I'm fine delaying it, I think it would be best if we're here, but my fundamental question is, at town meeting last year, we allocated a certain amount for the rec and a certain amount for kids' place. The board had MOU specific to the rec center and specific to the kids' place. And so this says just the rec center, so I'm assuming that the kids' place is, so those two MOUs are still in effect as far as I know. So we're talking about revising the old MOU, is that what we're talking about?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to the
Right,
question.
and then the other, we have just sort of big upon us the answer to this, but on this MOU, it says, that we agree to say something about, have a warrant article for town meeting, and I've always thought we can't, what's the word? We can make that decision as a board, but we can't make a future board, right?
Yeah.
So how
Yes.
does that work?
So with the MOUs, these particular MOUs, the way that I understand it, looking at the information going back is, the town and the rec center, do these on an annual basis. And so these MOUs is something that you go through and you do as a board with the rec center on an annual basis prior to the budget season starting.
Oh, okay.
And I think several years back, there was based on the records that I have, which it doesn't necessarily mean that they're entirely accurate, but there were a few years where it was done every year, and then a little bit prior to COVID, it kind of just plateaued, and nothing has taken place since, and so, several members of this board a few years ago brought that back up, and then I think we're now going into our third budget season where we've yet to have a signed MOU between the two parties. There was one brought to this board a number of months ago. It was never really brought to the discussion. It was delayed. And then the new, Caitlin emailed this and asked that this MOU be used in place of the old one that the rec center had proposed. But my understanding is it's something, that is expected to be done on an annual basis prior to the budget season. Now, you can change it and do it as you please, but that's kind of the knowledge that I have based on the information that's in the office.
So it sounds like delaying it is probably a good thing to do.
I think delaying.
I don't think it's any urgency there, proceed, so, I think we can wait.
Okay with you?
I think it would be helpful to have this done before the budget process, so if the board comes up to some consensus, at least generally with the rec center before the budget is in full swing, that would be helpful.
Cutting the next agenda. Don?
This is just from my memory, and Eddie Herb can help me. But,
It's like a blind leading the blind.
I know, we're both losing it. So the way I remember all these MOUs with these various nonprofits was, we developed an MOU, and then that was in effect until somebody wanted to change something. It wasn't an annual thing, and we had a problem with the rec center in that we didn't have one that was signed, am I right? And that we kept saying, we need to get one.
Something like that.
Right, and, so I think that, you know, if they want a new MOU, that's fine. But I don't think you're obligated, there's nothing that we had set up originally with any of the nonprofits that they had to be reviewed. They had to come and make a presentation every year.
Yeah.
That was part of it. But, and maybe they want new terms, you know, that's a whole different story, but that's my thought.
Right, and the
Well,
one,
for
It's written right in the MOU,
but,
which
but
you
I,
said.
okay, good. All right, so I haven't lost it.
All right, so we'll delay that to a subsequent meeting. Okay, other comments? Moving on, to hear an update on float maintenance, the request for qualifications, or was it a request for proposal?
Okay.
Request for qualifications and suggestions of how the floats will be taken care of this season and take any necessary action. So Herb, are you here to speak as coastal waters person?
Unless you would prefer to take the lead on this, I mean, I'm happy to give from our perspective what we've done, but.
I talked a lot. I can let you speak a little bit and then I can fill in the blanks.
So we have been involved in creating this RFQ as the board. It started out as a big wordy thing, thanks to me, and my wife edited it, and it's now a concise, more concise document. Thank you. And it went out, and there was some confusion with the dates. We were trying to get it so that the commission could review everybody and get a recommendation to you within a very short time period, because we've been waiting very long for this. There was some confusion with different dates in different places. The last one I think was September or October 30th or something. That was October 30th, yeah. The one on the MMA side. So what we did was we went with the closest one we could. There were 4 responses that we got. I summarized those responses for the commission. We went over them, and the commission could not come to an agreement on making a single recommendation. There's a little bit of apples and oranges. One of the respondents is not even, it's a Florida company that doesn't have any presence up here. You'd think they'd have enough to do down there with floats. 2 of them are 1-person operations. One of them is a 185-person operation. And so trying to get, we felt, the board felt, the commission felt that they needed more information to assess and make a recommendation out of those 3. So Justin has done a lot of legwork contacting all 3 of those individuals and talked to them. They expressed an interest in coming out. I thought that might happen yesterday. It didn't, apparently, or if they did, they didn't coordinate with Justin. I just caught up with him tonight on this because I knew he wasn't going to be here. He's at the same field trip that everybody else is at. There's a South Freeport, Zachary Pettit, there's a Yarmouth, the Boatyard LLC, and there's a South Paris, who has a facility in South Portland, Bancroft Contracting, they're the larger corporation. And I talked to Vika this afternoon, and Justin said the same thing. They have coordinated to some degree with Custom Floats. Custom Floats is looking for them to supply manpower. Everybody is understaffed in this sector due to everything we've been through. So bottom line is, if you want, I know, sorry. Bottom line is, if you want to make a decision tonight, you can do it without the board's recommendation on just tell Vika to pick somebody and go with it. We're not making more than a 1-year commitment to this, to any group we work with.
We don't even have to have a contract. We really just need to get folks out of the water, before the swing comes. If you want a recommendation from the commission, we'll go through this process where we try to get a little bit more commitment from the individuals. Basically, the main question the commission had was, you got a 185 person company that's giving us hourly rates. They have all kinds of equipment, all kinds of stuff. The other two gave us per float prices for pulling them. $600 a float and $700 a float. And I think it's on each end, so $600 to pull it, $600 to put it back in.
Pulling them means getting them out of the water and to the yard. How will they use our equipment?
Unclear. That was all given in the RFQ as possibilities. They did not ask for more information, they just gave a flat rate.
I will add that Tanner checked out the boom truck. If they need to use our equipment, the boom truck will work if it's in the yard. It can't drive on the road.
Oh.
The trailer is roadworthy. It's stable enough and the wheels turn, not frozen up. The large truck to pull the trailer requires a CDL license, which we don't have other than Bill Caldor. So all we could do as Public Works is have the single entity
Float them onto the trailer.
float them onto the
Which is
trailer,
what they were.
get them to the yard, and then we could boom truck them off the trailer into storage at the
We
yard.
were floating them onto the trailer
Yeah, that's
by putting the trailer under salt.
that's my understanding of what's been happening.
Using the outboard to pull them.
Since Vicky left.
Yeah, okay.
And we're not sure on the status of the outboard. It's been sitting a while. That needs to be checked out at the boatyard, whether they use our outboard or they bring their own.
Yeah, I would assume all of them would have their own outboard. So does Carol, just say, with the changes in the public works crew, are we back to where it might be something our crew with the help of one professional could take it on as opposed to going the 160 person route, or have you thought about that?
So we have had the discussion and that's where the Public Works has gone through and started the process to make sure that the outboard could be an operational use, that the vehicles could and would work, and try to be prepared in a way that if this particular season there is no contract. I mean, it's November, this is the time frame where that starts happening, where decisions get made or recommendation come forth. And so, there was, the idea that some level of preparedness was necessary to know to what capacity the public works. So there is, the capacity to what level. There's still things that, we're figuring out, like with the outboard, went to the boatyard to see whether it's, functional or whatnot, but
Yeah.
that's.
Carol, another
So
question?
did any of the contractors suggest that they will bring up folks to their facility?
Not explicitly.
And then it's a combination of taking them out and putting them back in, but also repairing them, right?
The per flow price that I quoted and the way that it's written, it's to take them out and evaluate them and give this board
All right, and then it's separate to.
a written report of what they think they should do. You guys would approve whatever repairs or some amount of money.
So I guess my thinking is, given the time of year, I don't wanna slow down this process. I kind of feel like we should let Nika and whoever else can advise make a decision whenever they think it's appropriate. If it was me, I'd wanna maybe have the guy come out or have some couple of them come out and talk to them, but I think it needs to happen.
Yeah.
So I think it's a lot to expect the brand new public works crew to take it on 100%. I'd be inclined to definitely hire one of these professional groups to help in whatever way makes sense.
Can you turn that into a motion at some point?
Do we need a motion?
Well, I just have, before you go down the motion, path, the original contract did say that it was gonna, upon the recommendation, come back to the board, and the board was going to make that decision. So if you do make a motion, I think the understanding that it was gonna come back to you for a decision, is important. The other part that is related to the floats, but somewhat irrelevant, is, we received, some concerned, comments about a piling at the Stone Pier. And so where the landing is, that the, if you're coming off the Stone Wharf, that landing that you know, are on top of, there's a split top piling that goes across. And it's kind of, at this point, is twisted a little bit. And so I had, upon getting, 2 different emails about this, reached out to Custom Floats, because Custom Floats was a company that we had used to fix some other issues on the other side, to see if they could take a look and assess to determine to what level that damage, needed to be, looked at. They happened to come out the same day and take a look at it and said that it appears as though it was hit, and as a result of the impact, the piling rolled and is now split. When it happened, I don't know. It's not something that is an immediate dangerous need that needs to be fixed, but he did say I would recommend sitting on it for, you know, the next 2 to 3 years. So start making plans of that. I don't know the level of cost. I asked him who he would recommend, because Custom Floats did say that this is not something that they could handle. It would require a barge and a crane and tugboat, a little bit more extensive than their capacity for one split piling, just to add another thing to all these other things that we have. And so what he did is he did recommend, the Bancroft, which is one of the companies that had submitted a proposal. He said that they're a fairly new company going within this avenue. They've been around for several years, but then the coastal work is something that they're just getting into. And so if you're looking to get some of this work done, that particular company is going to have the most manpower and ability to get it done. So separate from that, this is another thing that we kind of need to, we need to move and figure out. And with that particular thing, I was gonna mention it to you tonight, but I was gonna contact that company to give us a quote to see what it would cost to fix it. Or I don't know if you wanna kind of see if the same company could handle all of this, or just keep it totally separate.
Why is it Meeker?
So you're saying Bancroft is a company that could handle the replacement of,
The top piling, so
Piling.
Custom Floats recommended that he would recommend this particular company to do that, because they have the manpower and the equipment, and most likely more time than other companies, because they're just getting kind of, their legs wet in this particular field.
and Bancroft is one of the companies that submitted an RFQ, okay? And are
It's a
they,
larger company, right?
is that the 168?
Yeah, 185.
185.
A lot of people? Okay,
Yeah, 185. Yes, and undoubtedly more money to like pull floats, and things
Correct.
like that,
I
but
didn't see that.
Did they give a quote for the floats?
all they did was give their piece, all they did was what you would normally do with an RFQ, is they regurgitated the conditions verbatim, and then they gave us a fee schedule. And the fee schedule is quite reasonable. I have it right here if you want to go through it. I don't know how much time you want to go tonight.
Is it comparable to the other?
I mean, that $85 and $70 an hour, I think with the maintenance hourly rates for the single guys. They have like, 5 different levels of people, so.
Did they also, do they also repair the floats? Is that part of, with the Bancroft? Or not?
I'm sure they,
I would assume that they're able to handle the level of repair that's needed with the split piling, that floats is probably something within their purview as well.
And we did we would have room available for a whole bay. They could work inside and repair, you know, a float at a time. From the public works point of view, seeing how we're playing catch up, clean up, procedure up, and everything else, to have somebody else come in and do it is advantageous in my view, versus us struggling to help a single person and also trying to get everything else ready for winter. My 2 cents worth.
Carol, thank you, Jeffy.
What's me like? The folks are favoring ban. I mean, I'm here, and I'm fine with that. I think it would be important that they come out to the island and have a conversation with the public works and be to kind of really understand how it's gonna go, and maybe come back with more detailed quotes so that we have a sense of what to prepare for. But personally, I am fine with, you know, leaving Higa to make the decision, assuming, I don't feel like I have to recommend Shamcroft, because I don't wanna tie your hands if for some reason.
I would have to come back to you for a motion for the appropriating the money. So you would have to ultimately, you know, make that decision for.
So that money is not coming out of public works?
So that there is no space, in Public Works Department to have that come out of. So depending on the costs, some of it could come out of it, but it very well likely will probably have to come out of the, either like the barge, the ramps or the float reserve account for this particular season until a better plan is made for the future.
So would it work if I made a motion to authorize you to, you know, select a contractor based on what everybody's, and then consultation first, and then come back to the board with a request for funding? So that's my motion. I'd like to make a motion that we authorize the town administrator to, you know, select a contractor for float removal and maintenance in consultation with Public Works, and then, come back to the board with a request for funding.
That's recommended.
Second by David, discussion? Or,
So just to sort of put this in context, it wasn't a request for, a proposal, it was a request for qualifications, so we could maybe build a pool.
Right.
So does your motion include maybe not signing an annual contract for this? Are we just trying to get this work done? And so we don't have to negotiate an annual contract,
Not yet,
right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You clear on that?
I think that's a good way to do it, see how it works out and then.
Okay, so this is a very specific task that you're just, like any other task you do in town, they want you to just take care of it. And so it's separate from the RFQ process and all that other stuff that went through to try to get a group of qualified people that we could draw on.
It's my understanding to get it done.
Okay.
and is your intent that this would include not just the work on the floats, but also as a separate item, but also the work on the landing at the head of the ramp?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the town administrator's call, and I don't think the board needs, I think she needs to come back and ask us tell us how we can pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, if it did include that, it would make the choice very easy. Only one of the three would be
Exactly.
capable of doing that,
Exactly.
I think.
Yeah, I don't have a sense of how, or you said it wouldn't have to be done this
Yeah.
year.
But again, your motion is giving Vika that.
Yeah, I would like to authorize Vika to just do what she thinks is best and come back to us. I think she has more information than we do. My only comment is I think that whoever the, you know, preferred contractor is, they should come here and have a discussion. Because it all looks good on paper until you show up out here.
Any more discussion?
May I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
what role, if any, will coastal waters play from here on out?
Well, it sounds like there's, can't. You guys don't have a meeting between now, I mean, when's your
It's
next,
okay to say no.
do you have a meeting at all coming up?
We can call in whenever we need to.
Well, I mean, since you haven't now, there isn't a specific recommendation, I would say coastal waters is welcome to participate, I mean, that would be Vika's call, but again, in my mind, coastal waters can participate in the meeting.
You can coordinate all of it.
Now, I'm getting mixed messages here.
I think coastal waters is welcome to participate to the extent that they are available.
And we appreciate the work they've done to get us to where we are with this list of 3 people plus 1 big company. That's a good
And,
thing.
and
Okay.
if for some reason the one contract doesn't pan out, then I would like Vika to go on to the next one, given the time of year it is.
I will utilize coastal waters
Yeah, I
in
think-
this assistance, don't worry. You and Justin will remain as my point of contact when it comes to this.
Okay, Justin's the one with the expertise.
And we'll
But
have-
I mean, if you understand correctly, you didn't have a recommendation, coastal waters.
Correct.
But
I think given that we have an up and coming public works who could really be on the learning curve with a company that has a lot of capacity, I like the idea of the larger company and also to make sure it gets done. Thank you.
and I would add one more detail financially. I believe there's more money than we expected in one of those reserve accounts because we got grants for 2 floats. Is that correct? We had set aside money to buy floats and then we got grants.
We have recommendations in our maintenance plan for what a consistent balance, minimum balance for that account is. We're not quite there.
Okay, okay.
So we wouldn't,
They're also reimbursable
Right.
grants, so we paid some of the money, but we're not gonna get the money reimbursed until the floats are here.
Yeah.
probably till next year.
Okay.
So the one follow-up question that I have relative to this is, the float removal process itself. Do you want me to work with coastal waters and public works in determining what floats do or don't come based on what's been done previously? Or do you want to play a role in recommending what floats to remove? Because it's, when it comes
Should we
to
vote on
this.
the motion on the floor first
Oh,
and then
yes,
get into
go for
that? Yeah. So there's a motion on the floor, it's been discussion, all in favor? Unanimous, Richard's absent. And then I think we've got the sense of Vika's question. Does anybody have any comments on
So
that?
I think the coastal waters has a maintenance plan,
Yeah.
and so they would be the logical crew to work with you to figure out what floats go in and what, I think they have a plan to kind of, the cycle the floats through, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
And so I think it would be to work with them, I don't think the board knows.
Correct.
All right,
Any alternate opinions on that?
No.
Okay. So, that answer your question, Vika?
But the funding has to be within what's currently in the reserve account, so. Yeah, I mean, your motion doesn't have anything to do, have anything.
No, we did say for Vika to come back requesting.
There might be money in the,
But that's where it would come from, is that reserve account, 920,
for operations.
or some in
What-
operations.
I guess from how I'm looking at it, and if the board is understanding it the same way, is at this point, we would contact one of those, ideally the one company that we've talked about the most, have them come out here, have them give us a more concrete quote of what it would cost to get those floats out this year, and to basically get them in too, because that would be all within this budget cycle. And then a separate quote for the piling work. And then I would bring that information to the board for allocation of funds.
Yep.
And then that would be ultimately your decision in voting to proceed with that, with that road trip.
Karen.
I'm gonna ask if we can talk about one thing that's maybe a little bit out of order, but since Herb's here and it's very much related. We've been having discussions with DOT about the Chandler's Cove wharf renovation. And we just met with them, was it this week, Vika? So the main thing there is there are two should be related projects. One is the replacement. We are responsible for, I think it's 6 pilings,
6 and 3.
6 on
6 giant
Channel
pilings.
4. And then the fishermen and coastal waters have been pursuing the concept of a hoist, trap hoist or something. So in the most recent meeting with DOT, we found out that the piling estimate was double what it was originally. So it's 96,000 or something like that. That's our responsibility. We can apply for a SHIP grant to cover 50% of the cost. And we need to do that essentially immediately because they only have about enough to cover that in their funds. So that's something between Peter, Herb and I, we can do immediately. But I just wanted to let you know, there is the other round numbers, 50,000 that we are responsible for. But the other thing is there is Coastal Waters has been interested in, or I guess it's Coastal Waters, am I saying that correctly, interested in a hoist. DOT is running an electrical line, and so it's possible that that could be incorporated into the project. It's not 100% clear to me unless it is to you. And it's also very likely, I'd say, that the project might get delayed here, in which case that gives us more time and then they could apply for a SHIP grant for the other half, for the hoist. So I just wanted to bring you in the loop on that, just so we're all aware. I don't know where the money comes from for those pilings, but we have to pay on the order of 50 grand for the pilots, and we should submit a SHIP grant right away. And I think, you know, it was unclear. The first read we got, it sounded like the project would likely get delayed. When we met with them more recently, it was hard to tell.
Oh.
But the guy that's managing the project is done, I don't know, the next week. So he's leaving.
I think the end of this week.
Right,
He
so
just told
the
us.
guy we've been dealing with, who works with Chris Mail, is gonna be, you know.
The last I heard was that the work wasn't expected until fall 2025 earliest. Is that different now, or do we know?
Originally, it was fall of 24, then 2 meetings ago, it was sounding from Chris like fall of 25. Then at this last meeting, and I followed up the meeting with an email saying blah, 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 and they came back and said, maybe it will be delayed, but not definitely, so we don't know.
So if it was delayed, money could be part of the new budget. If it's not delayed, we have to find it in the current.
Correct, and relative to the hoist, what Chris did say is that we can't apply for any more SHIP money this year. I don't know if he means calendar year, but we could potentially apply down the line. And to give you an idea, the hoist is on the order of, what's the cost?
Well, they're wireless, $100,000.
Yeah.
And the lobsterman would say that the one that was built by the lobster company 5 years ago was $15,000. So,
Well, that's not
Well,
what
that's-
they're saying now.
No, it's in the 40 range.
yeah. But we can apply for a SHIP grant for half of the pilings. We can't apply for a lift, but we can apply for a SHIP grant for the pilings.
And immediately, we need to do that because there's only a little bit of money left.
Right.
And that would be our highest priority.
Right.
And we should do that. And between the 3 of us, I'll make sure that happens. On the lift, I think Coastal Waters needs to get in here, get a proposal, get a design, get it in front of DOT so that, you know, it's either in this project or they do it after this project is completed.
We are actively working.
Yeah,
We went through we had a draft proposal at our last meeting that we started.
right. Well, could be if DOT installs it, there's a charge for that work, because they have to incorporate it as a change order in the design. If we install it later, I guess it's all in our own cost.
I think at this point, it is wise to wait for Brian to be done and then kind of re-clarify some of these conversations, because the conversation I had with them, he stated to me that it was too late to have the hoist discussion.
Okay.
And it was Chris Mayo who said, no, it's not, which So I think at this point, just kind of waiting for whoever is gonna take over,
Right.
have more clarifying discussions and see where we stand timeframe, because it is very all over the place.
Right, and it's actually in that meeting that Chris said, yes, you still can do it.
Yeah.
And then I followed up with an email saying, just clarifying, we can still do this, and then I got the email back, no. So I think it is, he is right, but
The
I
only-
do think either way, if it's something fishermen and coastal waters wanna do, they ought to get it together so that we are prepared to submit whatever we might need to submit. Chris Mayo seems very supportive of
Yeah.
the project.
The only clear answer we did get was that they are not interested in taking over the ownership of the pilings. That was very direct. The rest of it is very wishy-washy.
And they said Long Island has the same arrangement.
So since that wasn't an agenda item, but related, I think we should probably get moving on.
The reason I brought it up is also just the cost of the pilings. The
Yeah.
fact that they have doubled means for the stone pier, we're looking at, probably a big chunk of change.
All float related.
Okay. Comments from the public on that topic? Collection of topics. Okay, moving on. Item 24-102 to discuss the next steps toward a 30% design for stone wharf improvements and take any necessary action. This is a follow-up to the public workshop that was held with Weston Sampson and Woods Whole Group. And it's an opportunity for the board and obviously for the public as well to weigh in on what our next steps should look like. So does anybody have, the board and Vika, I should say, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on what we should do next?
Well, so we received a grant of 75,000 from Maine DOT. I think we need some clarity because the grant says 100% design, and that was not our intent. And I don't even think the budget narrative says that, but. So I do think we had talked with DOT about a follow-up meeting to get some clarification on that. So before I sign that contract, I would want that, remedied.
And Vika, did you get a chance to call DOT
I
about?
emailed, so in the contract, there was a specific email that they said to reference with any questions. I emailed, I have not heard back, so
Okay.
I figured I'd give it this week and then follow up again.
Right, I think you're.
So that's one issue, which
Yeah.
is probably not a showstopper. I think it's a mistake on their part, but anyway. Then I think the other question I had is, given the potential sources of funding, well, I don't know what the $75,000 grant, I don't think it's gonna cover the full cost. And so, we have money in the stone pier reserve account, but if we're using any other funding, is there any requirement that, even in the future for construction, that we go out for bid or, if we use FEMA funds for any of this, is there any requirements? That was the question I had of the.
The requirements for the CDS money, which I would guess is now even more in question because the budget process is still not resolved and we just had an election, but the initial indication relative to those two different pools of CDS money was that that question, I would think, would go to DOT as the gatekeeper for such projects. So the question of, do we need to go out for bid, I think would go to DOT, which is one more reason to have the meeting you're talking about, perhaps. And again, we still don't know what the status of this year's budget is. Therefore, the CDS money is up in the air, I guess. What about the scope of what we would look at? If we move forward, if we get these questions answered and we move forward with a 30% design project with the intent of quickly getting to a 30% design, any thoughts on the scope of what we're talking about?
Versus phase 1, phase 2,
Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
basically.
Are we just looking at phase 1? Are we just looking at phase 1, phase 2? What's the board's thought on what we're doing with that?
I guess I think we ought to be being prepared to do phase 2, because we want to be able to there's so many things that needs to solve with parking and access. It seems like a good setup for the plan for the future. So I would propose if we're doing a 30% plan, we're not limiting ourselves to just phase one, even though that is the most critical in the short term.
Right.
So I would say phase two.
The other aspect of it to consider is that we need to, in order to maximize our opportunities with federal monies, state monies, include resilience relative to sea level rise and storms in some fashion.
Which is phase three.
No, phase
Did you do
two
that
also
with phase
incorporates
two?
that, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, phase two incorporated that as they described it. Other thoughts, I've got a couple more things to mention, but any other thoughts from anybody?
I think we have to understand what our fiscal capacity is. I
Mhm.
think that's a big question, and
Yeah.
so I don't think we can just pick kind of a phase. I think we gotta go out of the opposite direction, and based on the most recent meeting we have, sounds very expensive.
Yeah.
I did not get a good feeling about the cost. And I think as a community, we've got both sides of the water to deal with. Barge, you know, so I think really understanding what it is we can afford before we even embark on this is a question that we need to answer this year.
Do we need to have some sort of rough idea of what budgetary numbers are for various aspects of phase one, phase two as part of that conversation, or the fiscal capacity conversation?
Yeah, I think we have an $18 million estimate. We know it's between 10 and 20 million for the stone pier.
Yeah.
And so I think, let's start with even 10.
Yep.
What does that mean for us? You know?
Fiscal capacity wise.
And I think in some ways, trying to go out for funding, we're in a better position if we can demonstrate what our threshold is as a community. That's my sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we all need that to have this discussion. It's like when you're building a house, you know, what you want to build and what you can't. Right, because, you know. Well, I don't have the Apple stock to sell for the town, so I'm like, you know. But I do think that's a big question that's been on my mind.
So how would we pursue that picture? Through the finance committee?
And they may need some expertise to help them, but I think that is the number one question.
Okay.
We have a $3 million budget, and we're talking. You know,
So one point I did want to get on the table, and I know we have a visitor tonight who's obviously very interested in this topic. After that meeting, we realized that some of the contacts were going to be made did not get made. And apologies for that from myself as chair and one of the people who was working on that project. Will did share with us a copy of the document that was signed some years ago, which the town select board at that time signed, their chair signed, and committed to a couple of conditions that were different, that were more limited than what showed up in the Weston Sampson concepts, specifically the number of parking spaces. I think the conditions relative to the well and septic were represented in the Weston Sampson plan, but the number of parking spaces that was committed to in the contract, I believe was a maximum of 42, am I remembering that correctly? 40. And then the whole concept of a third pier is obviously not something that was entertained or discussed or part of the agreement that was signed. So I just wanted to get that out on the table so that everybody understands that disconnect was made and we're trying to take steps to remedy that disconnect. Back to the finance committee. Did we decide earlier that we're going to move forward with the finance committee without going to 3 people? Or do we decide we need to talk about that? Because to get the stone pier discussion moving, it sounds like the board's sense is that we want
that's
the.
my sense, I don't know how.
I saw some nods, we can talk more about it. We need to know what our financial appetite is before we get serious about contracting with anybody for a 30% design. are we able to move forward with the finance committee conversation on this topic, Mika, without changing, you're looking at the language right now, I take it. So David, Eliza, any further thoughts on understanding our financial appetite before we go too far down this road?
I think we need to get some answers to the questions that have been brought up already. I mean, I don't think we're ready to proceed at this point without some clarification on just what exactly the procedure is gonna be.
Yeah, so that when we sit down to talk with an engineering firm, we can say, we're looking for a 30% design, and we think our financial appetite as a community, considering what we put aside, what further money could be raised at the town level, bonding and grants, our total is 8 million, or it's 12 million, or it's 5 million, or whatever that number is, that's arrived at from some sort of intelligent process, ideally through the finance committee. So, Mika, what do you find?
So the finance committee guidelines, as they were adopted by this board, organization and administration, membership and appointment, the committee shall consist of 5 voting members and 3 ex officio. 4 voting members shall be registered voters in the town of Shebig Island, appointed by the select board. 1 voting member shall be at large by the select. 1 member should be ex officio appointed by the select, and superintendent and town administrator will serve as ex officio members. So, according to the finance committee guides that the board adopted, there needs to be 4 voting members, to be
move
a quorum.
And
A quorum necessary to conduct business shall consist of a majority of the current voting members.
So majority of 4,
That would
correct?
be 3,
right now it's 2.
right?
But,
Two
So
voting
the,
members.
so the quorum would be 3, right?
yeah,
That's the majority. So we just, we need,
We
but
need 1 more
also,
person.
I think we may need some outside expertise on this, and I did contact the finance guy, Balance, too, to see if he had a recommendation, because I think, you know, the most expedient way to do it, and I don't think it means we can't start moving down the track on 30% design. I just think when it comes to, you know, kind of understanding that, you know, what options in terms of elevation rise and even, you know, expansion or parking, I think, you know, we have to have in mind what's feasible financially. We don't want to tax people off the island so that they can get back and forth. That kind of defeats the purpose.
so are you saying hold off on conversations with engineering firms until we have the fiscal capacity
No, I wouldn't
conversations?
say we can do them in concert, we just are gonna need that in order to have a coherent conversation.
That's right.
Okay, so any thoughts about how we pursue conversations with engineering firms? Do we just roll it forward with Weston Sampson? Do we go through an RFQ process? Did we ever come up with our list of pre-approved engineering firms? Carol?
So I think we have I have a misunderstanding about what Legal is looking for, and so I thought that was related to the road problems, not.
Okay, got it, okay.
And I
So-
think the question is, you know, I think we were feeling a certain amount of urgency because of the CDS situation, so I think the goal recently was to move forward as fast as we can so that we would be prepared if that money was forthcoming. And I'm not sure I mean, hard to know if the situation has changed or not. Because if we don't have a 30% design, we may not be able to access
Right.
the money.
And I think there's also strong sense from the community that we need to be moving forward on it.
Right.
Eliza?
It seems to me that that was a lovely wish list to look at a finance committee with that amount of capacity and number of members. The realities, we're not coming up with it. So can we, at this time, have a motion to be able to have operate with 2 members? I certainly have faith in the financial input from those 2 members. So if we're being hung up on the fact that we don't have enough members on that committee to have a quorum, and that's holding us up for moving forward, then we change the number of members that we can work with.
I would strongly recommend that that be a different agenda item as a discussion, because right now, all of the agenda items that are here are, well, they're related, they're not, finance committee.
Right.
And I think that if the board was gonna go into the direction to make that change and to do something as little as 2 people to start the discussion, then I would strongly recommend that it be an agenda item where you make that
Okay.
as a vote.
Okay,
I agree with you on that, but I think what we could do is I can come back at the next meeting with a proposal on, you know, what kind of outside expertise we could get to help us answer this question, because I think it's not reasonable to expect the finance committee to do it on their own.
Right.
So I think that's the next step on that question. On the Stone Pier side, I think, you know, Weston and Sampson has completed that phase of the work. There is the question of, you know, where do we go from here in terms of the next step? We did receive a grant, we do need to get it, you know, some of these inconsistencies resolved. The bottom line is we have 75,000. I think to do a 30% design might be more than that, but I think I have every understanding from the community that we should move forward. So I don't see any need to slow down. I think it's really what is the process to select an engineer to do the design, right?
I think so, yeah. So do we want to go through a full RFQ process? Do we want to select one that we've worked with in the past? Mika?
This might help clarify. So this question also came up relative to, the South Shore Drive, which will be a discussion in the next agenda item. So I had, looked in and reached out to the town attorney to get some clarification. There is no requirement under state law that municipalities use an RFP, RFQ, or competitive bid process. Many municipalities do have something specific to their particular town, whether it's a charter or a separate ordinance. This town does not. So there are specific warrant articles within the town warrant as far as, you know, if something is above $10,000, then it would need to go through a taxpayer process. But if you're looking to solicit engineering firms, coastal engineering firms to work, the board, with how things are laid out, has the discretion to make those decisions. So I think there's been a lot of confusion relative to South Shore Drive and this situation where that's really been a holdup in many cases. There are several firms that the town has worked with on regular basis. And so I think for the sake of moving things along on a couple of different topics, my suggestion would be for the board to look at some of the firms that you've worked with and some of the firms that have been successful in terms of the relationships that would build, because I think that might be the quickest way that things can progress.
so a firm that could potentially be looking at South Shore Drive as well as phase 1 and 2?
Not necessarily.
No, totally, I would keep them totally separate, but I'm just saying that this hiccup is coming into play potentially with Stone Wharf. And it's something that I've absolutely experienced in the recent process with South Shore Drive, which I'll talk about more later. But in confirming with FEMA and confirming with the town attorney, the only pushback at times is if there are specific grant requirements. So, and that's something that the town is going to look for specific grants, and that is a requirement, then you might proceed. But at this point, with the Stone Wharf, there is the $75,000 grant. Then the work with Weston and Sampson is complete. The board does have a decision that you could make without having to go through an RFP bid process to decide.
Please.
Thank you. One more question. Why would we not proceed with Weston and Sampson?
Right.
Why would we not?
A question is, are they the best candidate or are they a satisfactory candidate for the work ahead? They brought to the table some conceptual design expertise from an engineering standpoint.
Right.
I think the big contribution they made was getting Woods Hole to the table, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Carol, several meetings ago with Chris Mayo, didn't we bounce some engineering names around?
Yeah, he gave us some recommendations, which I can't repeat because they were off the record.
Correct.
And so, I mean, but I would say based on Vika's comment, the two firms that we have worked with that I feel like we've had a good rapport with is, you know, GEI, we've only recently started working with them, but I think they have an excellent reputation and they're doing a good job on this project, which is a difficult project. We may not like the outcome. Then Collins Engineering.
That's the barging.
Right.
Then it's good.
Collins Engineering has worked for us in the past on both, you know, Stone Pier and Sunset. We also had McCollum McBroom, we've had Wright Pierce and Weston and Sampson. And of all those firms, the two that I think rise to the top are GEI and Collins.
Yeah.
For any, you know, coastal engineering related work. That's my personal opinion, so that's my thought.
I know
I think
Collins,
Weston and Sampson had Woods Hole actually had you know, a timeliness problem that was pretty significant. And, I just think, I think I was very impressed by their engineer, Chris Perkins, but not so much by the other staff. That's frank.
so of the two that you mentioned, are they both involved in specific work like the Stone Pier?
Oh, yeah, I think they've both done projects like that. That's my guess. But I mean, I think we can either pick one or we can talk to them both. It's up to you. I mean, what's your opinion, Bob? You've been working on this with us for a while, so.
I thought there was a lot to be learned from the historical perspective. I thought that was very interesting. I would love to talk to Collins. And I know we've been working with GEI. Has the concept of the Stone Pier come up in any of the GEI conversations?
No, and I twisted someone's arm to get them on the barge project because, you know, they're pretty booked.
Pre-booked that.
But I mean,
So
it doesn't mean the difference with the Stone Pier project, it's a pretty significant project, so firms maybe, you know, would be more interested. I will say that we tried to get Collins to bid on this phase of the project and they were not interested
right.
on the phase that we just completed.
I
We
was,
had trouble finding people to bid on that.
so Carol and I are the two board members assigned to this stuff. What if she and I talked to those two engineering firms and came back to the board with a recommendation, ideally at the next meeting?
Yes, please.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Carol, that sound logical to you?
And Vika.
And Vika, yeah, obviously, yeah. Okay, Donna,
I'm not an engineer, but I have worked with some of these people. And we spent a lot of time with Wright Pierce. And they did an incredible amount of work on what it would take to build the wharf up. And I'm curious, and I also worked with Collins. And I was not impressed with Collins, or as impressed with Collins as I was with Wright Pierce. And I felt that Collins was kind of superficial. And maybe it was what we asked for, but to me, I don't even understand what it is you guys are even asking them to do. And I'm not sure you guys are sure yet either, because you don't know how much it's gonna cost. I mean, it sounds like the chicken and the egg.
Right.
But I think you ought to think about what some of these people did before, if in fact that's what if you're still talking about raising the wall. I'm not even sure what phase two for sure in your mind is, because was phase one just increasing the parking and fixing the road? What was phase one? Because you haven't explained that today, and also what is CDC or whatever you're talking about?
CDS is earmarked.
That's what I thought, and I think that, the chances of that probably is.
Who knows? Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
A new day.
Yeah.
So phase one, phase two, as they were presented in that public meeting, phase one is basically some traffic improvement strategies. Traffic pedestrian lanes that minimize the interaction of cars and walkers.
Right,
And the circular flow being designed, designated signage, painting on the road, that kind of thing.
but not increased parking.
Not phase one. Phase two was the increased parking.
Well, where does raising the wharf come in?
Phase two also includes raising the wharf by an amount yet to be determined, which is a big part of the cost variable that Carol was alluding to earlier. If we try to raise it to a 100-year standard, all kinds of things happen, but
I guess that's why I'm suggesting at least talking to Wright Pierce, because they looked at that from various levels.
Yeah.
Because,
and both, phase two also includes the widening of Wharf Road and making, the pedestrian and traffic safety aspects of Wharf Road improved compared to what we have today.
So,
So that's phase one, phase two.
at one point you talked about having to go to town meeting about the 30% design at the last meeting?
No,
No?
no, we have money in the reserve account that could be used for the 30% design. We have a $75,000 grant that we hope can be used for the 30% design, but
Because once you start down a road, you start putting money into something, it's pretty hard to kind of go back. And I think you ought to get a check-in from the public before you get too far down.
Okay.
Literally down the road. But I do think if part of what you're thinking about is raising the wharf, you should look at the people who actually did the study on what it would actually hold. Because I didn't think that presentation, I was a little bit confused about what they were suggesting versus what the capacity the other people had.
the difference is that what we got from Weston Sampson and specifically from Woods Hole was a more data-driven set of facts on which the community can make decisions about sea level rise. And in the context of what it's going to cost, and in the context of how long it will last, those are the questions that we would want to go to that's probably what you heard. Those are the questions we want to go to the public with once we know more about what the cost might look like.
Because people have to know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not gonna beat a dead horse, but depending on where we are, then that puts Sunset back on the table. I mean, if you're thinking about building a wharf, another wharf for the long range off the side, if you're thinking about raising the stone wharf so it's gonna be good for 100 years, that's a different story. So,
I would thank you for your comment. Yeah.
And just to respond on to that, just so Project Collins did was like a $35,000 project.
Right.
I think, and they did a lot of, individual stakeholder meetings, and I think came up with some conceptual plans. I think we got a lot of value for the money. The Wright Pierce study was $150,000. I think they did a good engineering study, but they did not really address the question of the design elevation, which is why we hired Woods Hole. So that is a pretty fundamental question, and I don't think it's something Woods Hole is particularly, Wright Pierce is particularly experienced in, and so that is, we could certainly talk to Wright Pierce again and see where they're at, and see what they'd be interested in, but I think the difference, Collins came highly recommended from the city of Portland when we first hired them, because they've done a number of projects there. They are more on the design build side, so this is the phase of the project that they would typically participate in. And GEI sort of, they're a local firm. Barney Baker has moved into that firm, he's retired now, but that's, they are definitely the local presence on these kinds of projects. So since we have those, I think those two, I was concerned, although Wright Pierce did do a very detailed engineering study and, came up with a design, the response we had from DOT is great design, that's Cadillac design. but, you know, it's extremely expensive. And so that kind of caused us to kind of look for alternatives. So I think Bob and I can potentially talk to Right Peers too, that's maybe not a bad idea, they're familiar with the site. But I think that was what drove us to a third consultant, and frankly, we would have, you know, these other two, if they would have, it was just a time when nobody had capacity. But anyway, I think we can find, I think this is the point where we absolutely, whoever we hire next goes through the duration, and they actually, you know, be involved in helping get funding and also, you know, any actual construction. And I think everybody is anxious to have something happen out there, and I think it's partly just, you know, what we can afford at this time. But I think we need to, my goal is to get something done, even if it's not as much as we'd like to do initially.
Right.
So, the financial landscape may be changed in the past 24 hours, I don't know.
Right. Hello.
So I like phase one with being able to be prepared for phase two. The 30% design needs to be based on that plan, that is correct, right? So when we received the funding to make the conceptual plan, is it tied to what Wright Pierce did, what Weston and Sampson did?
It might vary, it might be some slight combination of both. The reason for the 30% design is you can come up with a pretty reliable engineering cost estimate for construction. That's why, so then we can go to DOT and say, this is a $10 million project, you know,
Okay.
how do you help?
So,
Another way to answer your question might be that when you get into that level of engineering design,
Right.
things that were proposed in conceptual design are probably what you start with. They're not necessarily the exact of what you end up.
absolutely. So we know we're going to see a lot of iterations,
Yeah.
no matter how we move ahead.
Yeah.
So one piece is, how do we get input from the community on moving ahead with this direction? So can we say that we'll use this to move ahead with this plan? Or do we need to have more community input to say, we liked what Weston and Sampson said, and we support the select board with moving forward for that? Do we need to do any more to involve the community? Because they had the presentation, I thought there was a lot of good community feedback from it, but do we need to do more before we have a plan to move forward?
I think it would be more valuable to bring a plan forward and say,
Okay,
this approach to traffic, this approach to parking, this approach to a sea level rise design, which would buy us
Yeah.
these performance features with this kind of a storm versus this kind of a storm versus this kind of a storm. I think rather than going into a public conversation with a blank piece of paper, if we could start down the path of the 30% design, which we have the grant money for, and then at an appropriate time, come back to the public and say, in consultation with this engineering firm, from a design build standpoint, here's what we're proposing, and I wouldn't limit it to phase one. I personally would like to see us tackle phase one and phase two in whatever that winds up looking like at the same time.
okay,
Consistent, however, with previously signed documents.
correct.
Yeah.
And input from our finance committee and
Yes.
whoever else to
Yeah.
see what our
Yeah.
capacity is.
Yeah.
Right, and
A lot of pieces.
I think it's the elements of the actual design. Are we talking pilings? Are we talking concrete on top of the stone wall? So those are where, you know, the engineers come into play about the cost. We do know that one element of the Wright Pierce design, which was the timber pier out in, you know, for the commercial pier, is just a non-starter because of the problems with the dredge channel. So it's just not an option. So.
At their suggestion, it's not an option.
Right, so it's a bit of a back to the drawing board, for example, on that. So I think we've had a fair amount of community outreach. We really have I think, a pretty good handle on what people's preferences are. And I think it's, to do the best with what we have and what we can afford. And I think we could, if we could go around again on kind of community preferences, but, as we're doing that, pushing communities aging, things are changing, so, we may as well just, bite the bullet and try to come up with a design.
And I would suggest that we've gotten a lot of community insight over the years. I think it's time now to hand it over to specific engineering talent to come up with specific designs beyond conceptual designs into engineering designs that are not quite shovel ready, but pretty close to it. I think that's, and we bring that back to the community for the conversation and then eventually for the funding conversation.
And on the plan,
Yeah, okay, all right.
thank you.
So we'll try to get that done before the next meeting, ideally, so, Will, okay,
Just,
please.
I have an offer of a ride back at the 8 o'clock.
It's okay.
Oh,
I'll just speak briefly. My name is Will Lund. I'm one of the owners of 27 Stone Wharf Road. I own a wood lot on the Firehouse Road as well. The public meeting happened after we had moved Ann Homlong, the resident of 27 Wharf Road, off the island, closed up the house. We didn't have any direct notice of that meeting at all, any actual notice or Ann does not have a computer. She doesn't do email. She doesn't surf the net. She doesn't surf the town's website here. And the day after the meeting, I received 3 calls at home asking what I thought about the proposal. When I received the proposal, I opened it up and phase 1, there's an alternate plan for phase 1 that shows parking right in front of Ann's home along the road. That is inconsistent with the signed agreement.
Yep.
Phase 2, obviously, with the larger parking lot, then the agreement calls for no reference specifically to buffering or any of the other terms of that. But really, the most important provision in that agreement is at the very end. It says communications relating to this agreement come to me come to the abutters at my address. That was to avoid a situation in which Ann and all of us are surprised. So I've had thoughtful communication since then. I think maybe that issue is resolved, but please do remember that the communication is the most important. There are not a lot of abutters who are adversely affected. It's just us. It's just us. So it's not to make the effort to communicate with us is not a burden on the town. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Will.
And I just want to apologize that you weren't notified, because, and I think it would be good if the board got a copy of that agreement.
Yeah,
we do.
yeah.
Okay.
I sent it, I sent it to all of you, I believe.
But I mean, we did not have that beforehand, right?
Correct.
It's on the town's website from 2015, so that's one source of it.
Yes.
Hey, thank you for during the whole meeting for that statement and.
It's on the Falmouth Council. There's not enough appreciation for
Oh.
the numbers, for the issues that we have to do.
Okay.
So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you, Donna, thank you for giving him a ride.
That's the least I could do.
Gotta go.
I don't think you could run that. Maybe you can.
All right, so I think we have our direction on that topic.
Yep.
Any other comments from the public on that topic? Okay, good. Okay, yes, ma'am.
At the Western and Sampson meeting, I believe it was stated that the slides from that meeting will be on the town website.
Mhm.
Are they yet?
I haven't looked for,
I mean, I haven't searched hard, but they don't jump out at me.
I did go looking for them and I'm pretty sure they are. I think it's under Stone Pier.
Oh, okay.
Stone Pier and or news and announcements.
Yeah.
But we'll double check tomorrow, make sure if they are under news and announcements, they probably moved their way down by now a little bit with so many other things going on, so we can bump them up.
All right, item 24-103, and we are, substantially behind our schedule at this point. Hopefully this won't take too long. To discuss next steps relative to South Shore Drive and take any necessary action. I know, Vika has been receiving some correspondence from some of the landowners on South Shore Drive, and, I think has there been a meeting yet with the two members from the board, or are we waiting for
So
FEMA?
the board, the two board members, there's an email out waiting for a response. There's a few dates that I threw out. So Bruce Anderson is the point of contact that is now, my understanding is correlating any information to the rest of the residents, and there's an email to David and Carol with a couple of dates. If you could respond to me, that would be great to see when we can set that up to meet. It will most likely be a Zoom meeting and involve the residents of that particular area. And the point is to update them, because there has been some information provided to the town after the discussion with FEMA and the steps that have been taken since. I think the residents have been more than patient through this entire process in terms of us figuring out what we can and cannot do. The biggest aspect is cost. The town cannot just go out and hire a firm and pay for all of this work to be done, because it does not have the financial capacity to do so. So there has been a very long process with FEMA that was significantly delayed as a result of us having a FEMA representative that really could not handle the capacity that was in front of him. We have since have a new representative. We met a couple of weeks ago with FEMA and MEMA and mitigation, South Shore Drive, East Shore Drive, South Shore Drive, and there's six projects in total that sit in front of FEMA. South Shore Drive is really considered as kind of the top priority at this point, from a timeline standpoint. And from the meeting with FEMA, MEMA, and mitigation, what it was determined and presented to the town, that the town has up to $488,000 that would be funded by FEMA due to the cost estimate that they were able to collect based on the damages. Now, the important thing to remember here is what FEMA is providing for funds is essentially what was lost. And so, there had been some information presented to us that was collected by Bruce Bowman in terms of the anticipated cost, which Bruce Anderson, I'm sorry. That was in terms of the cost up to $4 million for improvement. FEMA is not gonna cover that cost. FEMA is only going to cover the cost of what would be replaced that was damaged, which is why the town is in this situation of being stuck and really not being able to do a lot, because it just doesn't have the funds to be able to cover that. So where things stand, and the reason for really having this on the agenda item is just let the public know that we are hopefully getting closer into the step of meeting with the residents to be able to provide them with an opportunity to ask questions and present them with information that was discussed with FEMA and MEMA and mitigation. I did reach out to FEMA in the last couple of days, because from the last meeting that we had with them, the understanding that I had was that we needed to provide an RFQ And we needed to see quotes from at least 3 firms that then we can bring in front of FEMA to give us an idea and to give them an idea of what the actual cost of the projects could be, but also what those quotes provided information of what the pre-disaster level would be. So kind of two separate things that they, based on those discussion that they were looking for. David had helped in starting the process of writing up an RFQ. I had shared that with Carol, who they're the 2 individuals who have participated in this process. What David had presented with me was changed by me. I had shared confusion, too many things really going on at this point. And anyway, so in this RFQ process, the question once again came up, do we have to go out to bid? Can we just solicit firms that we're already aware of and speed up the process? I reached out to the town attorney to confirm. I then reached out to FEMA to see. And in that discussion, it led to a phone call after several back and forth emails, led to a phone conversation that basically said that, no, we do not need to have an RFQ process. We can go on and we can get a firm that we're interested in working with. However, if we get the firm that we're interested in providing us cost estimate quotes, then mitigation isn't going to step in. I was also informed that mitigation and FEMA is having a meeting tomorrow. So the town is not involved. This is FEMA doing their thing. And I learned this today, that there is a meeting set up. And to my understanding, the reason that this meeting is set up is because over the course of the last 2+ weeks, they had not heard from the town that an engineer has been selected. So they proceeded with setting up a meeting with mitigation. And so based on what I learned today was I said, do we proceed with a firm? And what I was told was you could proceed with a firm, but then mitigation isn't going to give you cost estimates at that point because you're going to have a firm that's going to give you cost estimates. And so at this point, FEMA is meeting tomorrow with mitigation. They're going to come up with a proposal utilizing the engineers that they have in place that they're going to bring in front of the town. The idea is this information should be to us by the end of the week, which would then put the town in the situation of having engineers through FEMA providing a cost estimate of what it would cost to bring that banking to a stabilized process. So what we know now is $488,000 is allocated to be funded to the town for pre-disaster costs. But we will have an additional number, potentially up to $488,000 for mitigation efforts for improvement of the stabilization. That would allow us to be able to have up to possibly $1 million that then the town could work with, knowing that that would be reimbursable, where then the town could utilize a firm of their choice to sort out permitting and things like that to proceed with any kind of work. Does any of that make sense?
Can I add a couple things?
Yep.
There is also a strong possibility from that meeting that the 488 and possibly the 488 for restoration and possibly the additional up to 488 for mitigation. While FEMA's first direction is restore it as it was, if engineering, either ours or theirs, comes back and says you cannot restore a clay bank, it cannot be done, then other options become a possibility, up to and perhaps even including the possibility of applying that money towards sloping the bank and putting the road behind the houses, if that became any sort of a desire on the part of the homeowners, any sort of desire on the part of the town, that is in the realm of possibilities, not a commitment from FEMA, but in the realm of possibilities. That concept that was discussed while we were down there was, instead of trying to rebuild a vertical bank that protects the road that's right here, start a sloped bank at the uphill edge of the road and slope it down, a sloped bank being more defensible long-term and being friendlier from a wave impact standpoint and soil transfer, all that kind of thing relative to what designs are being proposed these days from the DEP and other agencies.
So the one thing that I do want to add is, so up until this afternoon, I was working on and had an RFQ to then have that to be sent out so then we can collect qualified proposals to be able to move forward with whatever the work that could entail down there. And then I just wanted to make sure to clarify that whether this was done or not, so I reached out to FEMA, and then through that discussion, Marisol said, you can go out and you can get, RFQs that can give you cost estimates, or you can wait until we have this meeting and then we can provide that information to you. And my question was, well, what if the information that you provide isn't something that's compatible with what the town is capable of doing? She said, that's fine. Then you can go back and just proceed with the engineering information that you want to do. At this point, the information that we're going to be getting from FEMA is going to give us a rough estimate of costs that could put us in a better position of knowing what kind of numbers that we can work with. The 488 is, well, it has not been released money-wise, is federal money that at this point they are more or less have designated to that particular location. So that's gonna be money that we will have be funded to us that could contribute and help towards that particular location. And so hopefully within the next couple of days, they'll have a better idea and have their engineering firms who have the cost estimates for the damages and all of the details and dimensions have that information from litigation.
Regarding the discussion with the residents, I gave you what, 3 or 4 dates, I think.
Yes, I got your email. Yeah.
Sorry, I guess I haven't seen that, but it's a virtual meeting.
It will, I believe it will end up being a virtual.
That's a little easier for me, and I don't wanna spend more time on this tonight, because my brain's not really absorbing this, but I think, just so I'm clear, the 488 is for Social Road only.
Correct.
Then we're talking about, in terms of hiring somebody, it's an engineering firm to do a design for the actual construction, not a contractor to.
Correct.
Okay, so it's an engineering firm, and I would guess one hazard would be on the hazard mitigation side, just thinking back to the number Bruce had of 4 million, you know, the potential is it could be a lot more expensive, or what might make sense to do could be a lot more expensive. So, and isn't the hazard mitigation process sort of a separate application process? Isn't it I thought it was, no?
It's not separate application, it's separate within FEMA, but they talk to each other.
Okay, so I don't wanna get into the weeds tonight, I'll follow up with you directly, but I have been a little bit confused about kind of what the next steps were here. And so I'll catch up with you rather than run the whole board through this.
I guess the one quick thing to mention is that FEMA is, I think, finally beginning to really comprehend and understand that it's a waste of their money to just give people $480,000 and then have them put it back to how it was. And so there is a lot more involvement with litigation. And, there might not be significant funds that could be provided for that, but there are resources and them using their engineers to determine those numbers that could be a cost saving for us to have that, because it's not just gonna be a general number, it's gonna be their engineers that work for the federal government that provide that information. And it could be a cost savings for us and then give us a better idea what numbers we have to work with that then can proceed, maybe GEI taking on helping us the design process, so.
And if their engineer, if FEMA's engineer can come back and say, this should cost 488 to rebuild as was, and we can give you an additional 488 to mitigate and make it more defensible. And they come up with a conceptual design on how to do that. If when we go out to bid to get that work actually performed, it comes back in at 2 million instead of 1 million, there's a process. Not unlike what happens with the Army Corps where things get rebid and contractors get recognized. So they, I believe, said to us, when we said, if we can't get it done for that much money, what happens? They said, well, we can talk about increasing the amount then, correct?
I
Not a
believe
commitment.
so, yes, but it's such a confusing process that I hope that it doesn't happen anytime soon. The one thing also too is because we're an island, archaeological and historical surveys are gonna have to be done on the location.
Yep.
And that's a whole step of that the coastal engineers will have to go through that takes anywhere from 10 days to 30 days. So there's all these different steps that I think are really difficult to understand that are, make it so much more convoluted than anything that I ever thought that it would be.
Other question?
First off, my heart goes out to Asheville, North Carolina, with what they must be going through. Hearing about the changing financial landscape with FEMA, I think moving ahead with whatever seems to be the most expedient seems important because we're looking at funding running out for FEMA. To me, the notion that that bank can be preserved seems historically such a big challenge. And there you go. I like the idea of using the engineers from FEMA because that seems to be able to happen more quickly. It doesn't involve more resources on our part. And if it's working or not, it comes from their source. So I'm like, you move ahead on this one.
Let's withhold judgment until we see what their engineers come up with. But yes, it seems like a prudent path to follow for sure.
Okay, good.
Other comments? Comments from the public? Okay, thanks, Nika, for wading through all that. Moving on, item 24-104, to discuss the fiscal year 26 budget schedule. Who will lead the discussion and take any necessary action? In the packet was a schedule that Nika put together for that Chris put together, right? Based on both the way we designed it in the past, but also the way it happened last year. So a bit of an updated approach for a draft budget schedule. So any comments on the schedule as it's laid out?
Sleigh ride.
I think, hopefully we can get some traction with the finance committee in whatever form to work on, a more comprehensive and long-term and big picture look at capital, as part of this process. That would be a great thing to add to the table. and begin looking at what our appetite is for funding, not just for the stone pier, but for all the other things that are on the table.
Yeah.
Carol?
I would just ask that, the Saturday 2/22 workshop, is that during school vacation?
Yeah, yes.
And so I think we should move that because we're asking nonprofits to come and present, and it seems like that's not a good thing to do with the public question.
Good call.
Yeah, it's the,
And the fact that those are only public, so I'd be inclined to move that down, give us a little more daylight, 2 Saturday meetings in 1 month plus 2 select board meetings, and, that's a lot.
222.
So maybe, either move the departmental budgets up, or I don't know what makes sense, but
If we move February 22nd down to Saturday, the 9th, or whatever that Saturday is, would that make more sense?
March 8th.
March 8th?
yeah, I think we don't wanna go too much later than that.
Right. But that gets it into a slightly different density of
That
meetings.
works for me,
Yeah.
I just think we don't wanna do it during school vacation.
Makes sense?
Good catch.
The other option is you can discuss, well, departmental on a Saturday. Yeah, I guess that would send, you could discuss that with the first budget presentation. But that would be the regular meeting, so that wouldn't work.
Well, we have departmental budgets on 2/8, can we do something else on that too? I guess it doesn't really matter, we can't, never mind.
So if we're avoiding February vacation and we're meeting on a Saturday, that means it needs to be either February 8 or March 1
Okay,
for a Saturday.
yeah, why not March 1?
It's fine.
Okay,
For the nonprofit presentation?
yeah,
Then keep in mind you're March 1 and then March 4.
Swing right.
March 1 and then March 5th, you mean?
we're gonna spend time inside, that's a good month.
The 4th is a Tuesday.
Yep, that's
Oh,
the first
school.
meeting with the school, that's
Gotcha.
why it's on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
So instead of 2/22, it's 3/1.
Instead of 2/22, it's March 1.
And was the school okay with the schedule as well? We talked to the superintendent?
No,
No.
Okay. Might want to make sure.
We'll,
of course, for the-
Yeah, I mean, the only difference for them is, both of them are on a Tuesday of their meetings. so.
Yeah, yes. I did hear a comment from the last school board meeting, something to the effect of, that's pretty early in the process. What was the value, something like that. They're just checking.
The last couple of years, there has been the other part from the select board that having a meeting discussion so far in advance with the school board was difficult. And so having this first meeting with the school board, I would encourage the board to just kind of keep it relatively light. Do you have any large expenditures coming down there, Pike? So we can keep that into consideration.
Not a line by line. department
Not a
by
line by-
Yeah,
yes.
okay, so it's
Yeah.
analogous to our first conversation.
Correct.
Okay, got it. Yep. Okay, other comments
Plan
from the
for,
board? Okay, so with that one change to the schedule, book it. Off we go. Any comments from the public?
I have one thing is, how do you want to stagger this budget discussion? And the other thing is maybe it was last year, maybe it was the year before, there was some feedback from the board about wanting to have some clarifying questions answered from the auditors in terms of, how they stagger the audits and what goes in it. Would it be helpful? So the auditor did say that, we could do it over Zoom with them. Would it be helpful to try to set up a Zoom meeting with the auditor prior to the budget discussion or in line with the budget discussion? If the board has some questions about how the audits are lined up, or do you wanna forego
I'm
that
sorry, are you talking about the audits for the town or for these budgets that we're looking at?
for the town?
So I think a lot of those questions in the past had to do with the fact that the audits were behind schedule because of COVID and all those problems we had with audits in the past. Aren't we getting back closer to being on track with audits?
We are on track with that, yes.
I think some of those questions came from me. And, you
Yes.
know, I can either personally have a conversation with the auditors to answer my questions, or we can do it as a board. But when I read the audit reports compared to the older ones, I have more trouble understanding them. It's
Do
a
you
different-
wanna set up a Zoom, you and I, with the auditors,
If
and then
you
you can
wanna
ask
take
your
the time,
questions,
I
and
mean-
then that can have, I mean, he said that it could be as quick as, you know, like 20-30 minute call.
Yeah, and I think
so-
just going through, and I think the other people who might be interested would be a finance committee. So I think, let's see if we can recruit this third member that we need to have. I can twist somebody's arm if we have to, and then get the finance committee, yourself, myself, anybody who's interested, but also the finance committee, because they should, at a minimum, be able to understand the audits.
Yeah.
And so I think we're looking, you know, a few weeks, maybe January 1st, you know, beginning of the new year, we can set that up. And I would like, personally, I'd like to understand them, but I think the finance committee really needs to understand them in preparation for a capital plan.
Yep, I think that's a good plan.
And may I add that as a novice, I could be a fly on the wall.
Oh, yeah.
If you're
I mean,
speaking with the
anything.
auditor, and I think that Richard Heckel would have the same, both of us have spent time looking at the budget and just trying to become literate, so that would be helpful for me to be a fly on the wall. If you're having a Zoom,
Yeah, and what this
To
is,
go
is
through
the
that.
audit, the third party audit that's done of the town finances,
Right.
and it's difficult to read. It's,
Yeah.
you know, so the thing to do would be to look at that over before we have the meeting,
Yes,
and you may have your own questions. So
However-
that kind of plays into this whole concept of, you know, what's our capacity as a
Yeah.
town, and, you know, what's.
okay.
the
So
one
just let me know.
important thing to keep in mind, though, is that once that meeting is set up, we need to be mindful
Yeah,
of, if it's
that's-
3 board members or more, we need to advertise it as a regular meeting, that that's gonna be happening, so.
Got it.
But not a reason not to participate.
Correct.
Yeah.
Exactly, agreed.
And I mean, at that point, anybody could be open to sit in, and we could just simply say that it's a workshop with the auditors and no public input.
Yeah.
Kind of,
That would be the
cut
way to
off
do it.
that conversation and turn it more into
Well-
an education piece.
The clock will be running on the auditor's time, I'm sure.
Just let me
So-
listen.
In years past, from when I first joined the board, Mark led the finance conversations when we had the budget schedule. When we had the budget meetings, Mark facilitated those meetings, and then last year, Mark was no longer on the board. I facilitated the meetings. We should set up someone to facilitate the meetings. It could be, I would recommend it probably not be one of the new board members. It could be one of the older board members, one of the more long-term, older.
You can say it. That's fine.
It could be Vika, so we have to decide at some point, we don't have to decide tonight, but at some point we should decide who's going to facilitate the conversation. And then I think in our first meeting, when we talk about budget goals and priorities, we can talk about how we want to go through, as a group, how we want to go through them. I've seen in the past boards go through line by line, department by department, literally line by line, more than once. And other times we've gone through just looking for exceptions and problems, and that's a board decision as to how we want to do that, so.
One thing that I would like to add to that is that first meeting in December, if you could come kind of with a general idea of what your goals and priorities are and how you would like to see the budget process staggered, it will make it a lot more efficient for me in preparing it for you, so then you have it in the way that you want it, and I prepare it in that manner versus preparing it how it's easier for me and then not having it be a successful process.
So what do you mean by staggered? What would having to be staggered?
Well, in terms of
I don't know
just,
how to say, I'll follow up. I don't know how to say what my priority would be.
Right.
I'm just gonna sponge everything and you're just gonna have to say, this is,
So an example of a priority would be Bob makes a statement that he wants 0 tax increase. And Tom or Sally might say, I would like to have 0 operational increase, but I believe we need to really focus on some of these big capital projects and boost our capital spending with a maximum of a 4% property taxing. Different people are gonna have different goals, but that's,
transfer station focus or.
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
so it can be
Thank you.
how much tax impact, it can be what department you think needs a ton of work, what capital project you think needs to be focused. Those are the kind of high level topics we want to talk about to set the stage for what gets put together as proposed budgets.
Helpful. Thanks. Yep.
Other comment on that topic? Okay, moving on, any other business items?
Well, I have one that came down from the Island Institute, part of all these go fit projects. There's a new category of grants, and they are acting as a, I don't know what to call it, service provider.
Mhm.
And it's, to do a pretty high level vulnerability climate vulnerability assessment for, and they're focusing obviously on island communities. And if we're interested in participating, they just do it, we're not, it's not like these other grants where we are participating, it basically, you know, it's sort of like a simplified comp plan where they go in and say, so we've looked at several aspects, sea level rise, groundwater, and Julia's working on the marine environment. But for example, we haven't looked at transportation, we haven't looked at even like heat safety, health issues, which is becoming a bigger concern. So they would just identify all the sectors and kind of, you know, prioritize them. So, and the reason they suggested it is that GoPIP is gonna require every community to have one to be eligible for climate resiliency related funding. So think of it like the comp plan. In order to get grants, you have to have a comp plan. This is kind of the same thing. They wanna kind of make sure everybody's gone through this step before they apply for funding.
So they'll do the groundwork, they'll be wanting to talk to us.
Climate action team would participate in providing some information. We said we don't have a lot of capacity, we don't have a lot of community engagement. There will probably have to be a meeting, because that's, I assume, but that, so it's a $10,000 grant per town, so it's not a huge
Right.
undertaking.
And GoPIF is an acronym for
Go
government
there,
office.
Government's Office of Policy and Innovation, that's the group that, that's where we got on an action grant,
Yep.
and, you know, so I think this is still after yesterday, I think the landscape hasn't changed on the state side.
Right.
But that's my
Yeah.
understanding. So my recommendation is we say yes. And the only thing they need is a letter of support from us, which people could send, and they gave me a template. But I didn't, you know, it's up to the board, and I think it's a low effort opportunity to have them prepare something.
Well, and if it sets the stage for us to have eligibility for grants down the road from the state, I think it's a no-brainer. Do we need a motion, or is this a sense of the board kind of thing?
I think it's just the sense of the board.
Any reason
That's how
not to
it's
do
been,
this?
kind of.
No, I mean, first I said no, because I feel like I've got enough going on.
Right.
Climate Action Team has this ETIP grant, but I think they
They're gonna do
understand where we're coming from, and I think they want, you know, they want to help. And so Long Island is in the same boat,
Yeah.
so Long Island's also planning to do it for the same reason, and they don't have any more, they have less capacity than we do.
I think it's a no-brainer.
Okay.
Everybody,
All right.
okay?
Is that through Hannah Pinckney's?
So Hannah Pinckney's office, right,
Right.
and it's basically, they've got communities doing all kinds of different things, and some communities like South Portland and Yarmouth have done these very expensive, full-blown vulnerability assessments, $100,000. we're never gonna get there. We've done pieces of them, and I feel like we know what we need, we know what our priorities are, but this is to help fill the gaps, to identify the things we're not thinking about, wildfire. Heat, heat-related illness that, we don't have, do we have a cooling center? No, not really. Right, so those kinds of things.
By the way, the rec center is working on some funding to become a designated cooling center and being able to get air conditioning
Cool.
with that as a building. So that's definitely a vulnerable thing for this community.
Right.
So you're gonna give a template to Vika, Vika's gonna send a letter of
I'll
support.
fill it all out, I'll get you the stuff.
Sweet.
Thank you, Carol.
Well, don't take me, that came through the IRS.
I know you.
Thanks, but that's your, yeah. Other business? All right, moving on to communications. Vika? You sent one to us, I believe. Everybody got
You
copies?
got a couple actually, right? You got one you got, and then one you got.
Yeah.
Why don't you start, Vika?
I forwarded communication from you from a resident with some,
Right.
suggestions for how, a lot of this infrastructure costs could be handled.
Thank you.
And I thought you sent us one, or you responded to one that got sent to the board. Definitely.
Yeah, and, it led to Vika having this is the, letter that came from Norma Drew
Right.
questioning the certificate of occupancy. Vika, did you copy everybody on your reply?
I replied all, so I'm not sure who was connected in that email, because I wasn't initially a part of it.
I don't remember that.
But
I don't remember the reply, I remember the request.
Vika's reply was, "Good morning, Mrs. Drew. Town attorney has asked the McKee's attorney again to provide the email containing the CO. Town staff, including myself, were unaware of the existence of this CO or that it was issued. This information was not in town records. The town attorney has stated clearly that the select board cannot revoke the certificate of occupancy." So the topic was brought up in an appropriate fashion, and Vika did check with the town attorney, with the attorney who's been working on all this stuff, and got a reply back to Ms. Drew. I'm guessing.
So basically, the town doesn't have a certificate of occupancy.
No, the town does.
Oh, the town does.
Well, the town now has a copy that was presented to us
Oh, that's right.
way after the fact, and we've asked.
Confirmation of the promise.
Executive session, you can, we
Yeah,
get
yeah, that's
counsel, I can provide more information.
Correct. Yep,
Okay.
yep, that's it, that's how we talk about it. So, other communications?
I can't think of anything at this moment.
I share that feeling. Okay, moving on to approve the minutes from October 16. Is there a motion? Motion.
Move to approve the minutes of October 16th.
Thank you, David.
2024.
Second by Eliza. Any discussion? All in favor? Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for putting your note in such timely and accurate fashion. Items to be placed on future agenda.
I'm gonna suggest the diagram of that scope, because I'm hoping we'll hear, if not next meeting, then the one after. So we can communicate, but I just don't want to forget about that, because they're trying to wrap up their report.
Good, good. That would be great. Because December 15, I believe, is our
Yeah.
Yes,
D-Day.
December 15th.
Okay, so starting at the top of the list, hazard buildings, as was mentioned during the public comments for items not for review, is a potential discussion for the board to talk about in the future. Amendments to the finance committee, do we need to talk about that now, or are we just moving forward?
We'll just find somebody. I'll make her do it if we can't find anybody.
Good problems.
Really, we just need to do it.
We need some, we just need a third person.
Solar array purchase as a future one, MOU at the November 20th meeting, hopefully. And we'll also talk about in that conversation whether we need a separate one for CRC and KP.
They are separate account allocations.
There are separate allocations.
I'll follow up with Caitlin, see if they
My
can
preference. would be
prepare
to
one
keep
for
it separate.
KP prior to that discussion.
So I heard in the conversation tonight that, this used to be something we had with every nonprofit.
Yeah. Yeah, we did.
Um,
And Herb did not share the opinion that it was an annual renewal. He thought they did it and that was it.
yeah,
That was true too.
So I
Well,
think
we
it's
did
fair.
have, we did have something on file at least.
yeah.
And it might be good if we're doing it, we maybe should have, I don't know, I don't know what these do, because I have to say, when you look at the conditions of the MOU, they weren't being followed for years.
It's true.
So like,
This,
if you're gonna do it, you should enforce it.
are you talking about of this MOU that we have from the rec center?
Yeah, so
All the MOUs involved with nonprofits.
The one aspect of the conversation with nonprofits that was still troubling to me last year, even after we began requiring a P&L and a balance sheet, was that the format and the actual content varied dramatically from agency to agency and really wasn't a P&L in several cases. On the other hand, I think it's, to me, important to really focus where the big dollars are. Some of them seem more of a service to the town, others are a service to the town, but they're a real big dollar figure, but.
Yeah, that would be a great discussion, that first discussion in December for priorities.
Yeah.
If there is a specific template that the board wants to agree upon to use to provide to the nonprofits that they expect to be brought to them, that would be a good time to kind of make that consensus, and then we could provide nonprofits with a more detailed
Yeah.
expectation.
And I think we had I think they had a financial threshold that they had to be above before they even had to submit it. I think that's how we talked about it last year, in other words, over 50,000 or something,
Yeah.
they submit all this information.
But I mean, as far as like the template that you're looking for, because there was that threshold, but then how it came in, they all vary.
It was.
So if you want something specific in terms of how they look.
Let's talk about
There
that.
was a list at one time requiring a P&L, let me see, I can't remember what else was on it, but,
Yeah, that's your problem.
some things that, some of the organizations fail to provide, we would have to ask them to.
And then the other thing that happened last year was one of the organizations requesting money sent in a financial statement that was 80 pages long.
Well, the balance sheet got more people upset than anything because they don't know what a balance sheet is. But the P&L is everything.
Getting slightly off topic.
Yep.
Yeah.
This-
Moving on to agenda, yep, so the MOU, okay. Dollars, we'll need to approve dollars after Vika has her conversations relative to the floats removal and also the head of the ramp situation. Next item, amend the finance committee number of members, we said we're probably not gonna do that. Carol is going to talk about outside financial talent to help the.
Yeah, that's one thing, I'll come back, I have some ideas,
Yep,
and so.
okay. Thank you.
I think it's a one-shot deal, but it's worth it.
Okay. And then Bob and Carol will report, hopefully at the next meeting on 11/20, on conversations with engineering firms relative to this next phase of work for the stump here. And then minutes, 11/20, that was the thing that you
And
decided.
I have to look, but I think maybe they committed to a presentation even at the end of the full report. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I mean, we can look at that and see what's necessary, but, you know, there'll be a lot of public interest.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing is the board retreat update.
Oh, yeah. Did you?
So there is, there is information that has been provided to us by Christina.
Yep.
There were 2 board members that took on task to
Yep.
provide an objective for, the other 2 items that we didn't get to. And the consensus from my notes was that this would be something that the board would want to approve prior to the next budget season as far as goals and objectives. And so it would be helpful if that was on the next agenda item, because the following one is the priorities for the discussion, or it could be on that agenda item too, so you can discuss about those goals and then goals for the budget process.
The two board members who agreed to take on, remember those tasks that we worked through and then we ran out of time? It was Richard and Bob who agreed to do those. Bob hasn't done his yet. Do we know when?
Carol and Bob.
Carol and Bob? Oh, I thought it was
What did
Richard.
I,
Yeah.
I'm surprised that I did anything.
Yeah, it was
So
pretty.
one was relative to Stone Wharf and one was relative to Bargain, I believe, but I'd have to look back on
Really,
that.
because I don't remember agreeing to anything, but maybe I did.
I forgot that I did until she reminded me.
What is it that we were, what is the,
The smart sheet format template that she gave us.
I'll send you an email
yeah,
about
I
it.
just don't.
I'll send you all an email about it.
Do we have minutes from that meeting?
Yeah, she said.
Yes,
Yeah, okay. And can we add the joint standing committee? The meeting is November 19th, so can we hear about that on the 20th?
no,
I would say probably not.
You can't because of the,
We'd want to include, yeah, it wants to be on the packet, yeah.
got it.
But it is something for the future, so.
Yep.
1st December
Okay,
JSC update.
thank you.
All right, at this point, would entertain a motion to enter executive session.
Second.
Gotta
no.
read.
I move we, have an executive session pursuant to MRSA, 6C, acquisition of real property, and MRSA 6E, consultation with legal counsel.
Second then.
Okay,
Please.
all in favor? All right. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
So I had sent out an email.
Hold on.